Welcome. Buenas tardes. My name is Armin Schwegler. I'm a professor in the Department of Spanish and Portuguese here at UC-Irvine. I'm here today to tell you an amazing and uplifting story about a very unusual people. These are the people of Palenque. Resilient people. People whose culture and language I have studied for the last 30 years. And in the process, I'm happy to say, I have become their friend. These people have had unusual lives, in part because they have been isolated for virtually 400 years. Because they are poor. Because historically they did not know how to read and write. And of course, because they have been black, and blacker than black within their own country. Nobody has written down their official history. And worse still, even the Palenqueros themselves do not recall where they came from in Africa and who founded their village. But they do remember that there were unusual people with a special spirit. They were freedom fighters, the first free, officially free community anywhere in the Americas. They speak their own language. Kucha, bukle habla lengua kuyo, ¿cuánto me tenés? Yo no tenés do una hembra. And so, today I'm going to tell you the story of how, through studying their language, and ultimately also their DNA, we have managed to reconstruct their history and their origins with great precision. So let me take you to Palenque and let us watch what it looks like.
San Basilio ri Palenque, Cundilo ri África aquí Colombia. Ya sendari Palenque, to su eri botrocolo. Espíritu y tiela mí, a sendari chamuquina. Su tu hace botrocolo, potocusa lo que tata, deja suto. Como es mequiro, lumbalú y chitiao. Ya senda ribotrocolo.
Agüe sui papese más en despierto lo que vení de África. Palenque fue lo que te da sueto de Maguarumá, de América.
So there we are, and let me take you back to the beginnings of how this history and story really unfolded. To do that, we need to go back to 1985. This is the moment where I traveled to Colombia for the first time, boarded a bus, and then walked into this village, a village of black people, where I became the white man called the colored man. And this is the language that I heard, a language that I could not understand even though I speak Spanish fluently, a mix of Spanish words, African grammar, and much that they invented for themselves.
¿Usted tan para mala gana? Yo, tan para mala gana, mañana no martes. Mañana es martes. Y tan como el miércoles, jueves. Y tan vende maíz pilado, cuyuki, maíz.
So there I was in this village, no electricity, no running water, and yet beautiful people, full of spirit, speaking and celebrating their culture and their language. But it was life in isolation, a life where they could preserve African customs, their own speech. But they were bilingual and have been bilingual for centuries, so they were acquainted with the outside world to a fair extent. But because they were black and so poor, people laughed at them constantly. They were ashamed to speak their tongue, and half of the population had already given it up when I arrived there. But it was a little Africa in the Americas. And in this context, my friend Victor, that you can see here, and I, and the rest of the community, always wondered, where did these people really come from? And as this girl told me and asked me many times, di Andiri Africa sotto amini, where in Africa did we really come from? But this search for African origins, as you can imagine, seemed rather hopeless. And let me explain to you here in a couple of minutes why it seemed so daunting to find this out. For one, you're all aware, of course, that the slave trade was a huge undertaking that lasted roughly 400 years. There is now a new dynamic map on the internet that I encourage you to visit, and let me explain how it works. On that map, you see dots. And each dot represents a ship of 3 to 4 to 500 slaves. The life expectancy on the ship, as you'll see in a minute, was short. But the life expectancy for these slaves, once they had landed in the Americas, was no more than 2 to 3 years. So keep that in mind as you watch this map evolve and move as the dots go from Africa to the New World. Every dot represents, in a modern sense, a jumbo jet falling out of the sky. 20,000 ships you will see fly across the screen compressed into less than a minute. 12 million slaves, 20% of which perished during the voyage, and 20% of whom were children. So let us watch in silence and in horror as the slave trade unfolds. So there you have it. Clearly, can you imagine what we faced? The complexity of reconstructing a history for a single people in a single village, speaking a singular language. And you may have noticed that a lot of these ships did not go to the United States. In fact, the slave trade was mostly a Latin American phenomenon. And Cartagena, the city where the Palenqueros ended up, was the New York City of the slave trade. So how did we manage to figure this out? Well, there were some initial clues that turned out to be key. Let me explain. To this day, the Palenqueros, when somebody dies, they dance around the coffin with drums and they go into trance. And they chant a chant that came from Africa. Chimang Kongo, Chimariloango, Chimariloango re Angola, and so they go on. But as they chant, just like you, they do not understand what they sing. It is very much like Latin in church. Emotional content, but no real meaning in terms of words. And so as I lived with the Palenqueros, I decided to study these songs close up. And I wrote a book of about 800 pages. And then I showed that these texts can actually be understood. And here's what that song says. From the Congo people I am, from the people of Luango, from the Luango of Angola. And if you're familiar with the African map, then you realize that this is really one and the same region. As you can see on this map, it refers back to the old Congo kingdom. It refers to the Luango coast, which is adjacent, and Angola just to the south. But more meaningful still is this. All these people from these three regions spoke a single language, which we call Kongo. A language still spoken today by 5 million people, but Palenqueros do not understand it anymore. This is the language that lies in the past. And it sounds like this.
Wena yewonge, wena yewonga mo malari, wena wonga mo batu bankaka.
And then, as I heard the language, as I realized that maybe, just maybe, these Palenqueros were truly different and special, I had a revelation. And the idea was very simple, that the Palenqueros were one type of people when they ran away, coming from a single place, having a single language. And over the years, as I progressed with my research, we found more words in Palenque that linked us up with this old Congo region. As you can see here, the word for cattle is the same on both sides of the Atlantic. And in Palenque, the word for snake, nyoka, sounds very much like it sounds in the Kikongo language. So we gathered more and more evidence, 200-300 more such words, and it became ever clearer that there was a strong connection to this Congo. But the problem remained. We couldn't really be sure whether all these people had come from the Congo or whether they came from other regions in Africa as well. So we had still doubt, even though we had learned a great deal. And that leads to the big jump that comes in 2010. This is the time when population geneticists had read linguists' articles, including my own, and they wanted to see whether our hypothesis was correct. And this was the moment when we began to team up with them. This included multiple teams from all over the world, but one person in particular, nZambi Poor, was instrumental in this work. And so they did what population geneticists do best. They collected data, and they collected data in Palenque and in Africa. And they obtained DNA from 42 population groups from all over the place. And then they also zeroed in particular, on this Mayombe region in the Congo, where I had said that the origins of these people must lie. And so, after months and months and months of work and analyses, the results came in. Are the people from Palenque really descendant from this very small community of Mayombe, a region no bigger, perhaps, than Orange County? As you can see here, we were right on target. The DNA data confirmed exactly, especially for the male population in Palenque, what we had suggested. So let me cite just one or two sentences from the dissertation that nZambi Poor published in 2011. The DNA analyses, he says, are in accordance with linguistic and historical data, which suggested that African, Yombe-speaking slaves founded Palenque. So in short, what this means is that my friend now can be sure that her ancestors indeed came from the Congo. It also means that these ships that you saw flying across the ocean carried some of these ancestors between 1600 and 1650 before they managed to escape into the hinterland of Cartagena. So what does all of this really mean for us? Well, it means a lot of things. For one thing, it means that history once lost almost completely can now be reconstructed again using language, using DNA, and other information. But perhaps more importantly, it also means that the people once so stigmatized can now be proud again. And the Palenqueros have regained their pride. They have regained the pride to the point where they now speak their language in front of visitors, and there's a lot of them now in Palenque, openly so, and with enormous pride. So Juliana here, that I met 2 weeks ago in Cartagena, even in front of tourists, spoke with me in Palenquero, and she insisted on speaking Palenquero only for everyone to see. And as this girl told me, ma gente suto ata contento ri sabe, riandi suto amini, riman Kongo. We Palenqueros are now happy to know that we too have a history. Just like the white people have a history in history books of Colombia, they too now have their own story. And so that stigma has fortunately vanished. And not only that, but the Palenqueros have now become famous to the point where the UNESCO now protects this village officially. Even President Obama met up with them, something unimaginable 30 years ago. Shame has gone to fame. And so now I have a dream. And the dream is as simple as it is powerful. And the dream is to unite my Palenquero friends with their distant ancestors in the Congo. Can you imagine what a happy embrace that would be? 400 years in the making, 400 years of separation, and 400 years of forced separation at that. So I invite you to join me next time, and I hope that by that time, that dream will have become reality. Thank you very much.